My wife won top salesperson at her father's company. At dinner, she embarrassed me. How does it feel watching me succeed while you do nothing? Everyone laughed. Don't be upset. I'm just teasing. I replied, teasing is fun. Want to hear mine? I own 77% of your company, and now you're fired. Ever sat at your own dinner table getting absolutely torched while wearing a suit that costs more than some people's rent checks? Yeah. That was my Tuesday night. There I was, stuffed into a $1,200 Tom Ford suit that fit like a second skin, holding a champagne flute full of something that honestly tasted like it came out of a cardboard box with a tap, watching my wife Isabel soak up the spotlight over her latest so-called triumph, like she'd just split the atom or discovered electricity or something actually worth celebrating. Spoiler, she hit a sales target. Revolutionary stuff. Someone call the Nobel Committee. The Redwood Steakhouse was exactly the kind of place where waiters quietly judged you for ordering your steak well done, and the lighting was dim enough that reading the menu required night vision goggles. Everything about it screamed I'm loaded and I need the whole room to know it. Gold-trimmed plates, a chandelier that probably ran somebody a small fortune, the whole 9 yards. Isabel had picked this place because apparently hitting a quota at her daddy's company warranted the kind of fanfare normally reserved for Oscar wins and medical breakthroughs. Isn't this just incredible? Isabel practically shrieked, her voice cutting right through the ambient jazz that was really straining to sound classy. She was glowing, and not in the quiet, I'm proud of myself way. More like the everyone drop what you're doing and acknowledge me right now way. Her blonde hair was set in those flawless waves that required a whole crew of professionals and enough hairspray to do real damage to the atmosphere. Her dress was designer. I knew because she'd casually dropped the brand name roughly 47 times while getting ready. The table was stuffed with the usual crowd. Her father, Gerald Kinton, held court at the head of the table like some kind of boardroom monarch, his hairline retreating under the chandelier glow. He had that particular look you see on successful middle-aged men, the one that says I peaked somewhere around 1987 and I'm still coasting on it. Beside him sat Monica from accounting, whose entire personality was built around agreeing with whatever Isabel said, and Trevor from marketing, who had this maddening habit of clapping at completely wrong moments, like he'd been stuck in a pep rally for 20 years. Miles, Isabel grabbed my arm with a grip that looked affectionate and felt like a handcuff. Did you catch what Daddy just said? They're talking about making me regional director. That's wonderful, honey, I said, washing it down with a sip of disappointing champagne. I found myself wondering whether fancy restaurants did this on purpose, pour mediocre alcohol so the overpriced food seemed better by comparison. Some kind of psychological hustle disguised as fine dining. Talking about it? Gerald bellowed, the authority in his voice coming from a lifetime of never hearing no. She's already got it sewn up. My daughter, youngest regional director in Kinton Holdings history. He raised his glass like a signal flare, and everyone at the table scrambled to follow like some choreographed flash mob. Trevor clapped. Obviously. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the supportive husband while quietly calculating whether these steaks were going to justify the heartburn I'd definitely be getting later. Isabel launched into a full breakdown of her latest sales strategy, dropping words like synergy and paradigm shift with the confidence of someone who'd inhaled one too many TED Talks. Her colleagues leaned in like she was unlocking the secrets of the cosmos, when really she was just describing how she'd talk some clients into contracts they probably didn't need. The real key, she said, waving her champagne glass around in a way that made me nervous about the tablecloth, is understanding what's hurting the client and presenting yourself as the cure. It's not brain surgery, but not everyone has the natural instinct for it. She looked at me when she said that last part. That look. The one that meant, unlike certain people sitting right here who coast through life doing absolutely nothing. I'd seen that look so many times I could have painted it from memory. Miles, you must be so proud, Monica chimed in, her voice dripping with the kind of artificial sweetness that makes your molars ache. Having such an accomplished wife. Oh, I'm drowning in it, I replied flatly. Seriously considering constructing a shrine. Isabel laughed, but there was an edge underneath it. He's kidding. But really, Miles has been incredibly supportive while I've been climbing. Haven't you, babe? The thing about loaded questions is they're landmines gift-wrapped in ribbon. No right answer exists. Agree too hard and you look pathetic. Push back and you're suddenly the villain. So I did what 3 years of marriage to Isabel Kinton had trained me to do. I smiled and said something that meant nothing in particular. I do what I can. Which is what, exactly? That came from Bryce, one of Isabel's sales department guys, with a smirk that said I drive a leased BMW and it defines me. No offense, man, but what do you actually do all day? The table went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, The awful kind where everyone suddenly becomes very focused on their water glasses and the thread count of their napkins. Isabel jumped in before I could say anything. Miles does freelance work. Tech stuff, mostly. Very flexible schedule. Flexible. That was her go-to word for unemployed. Never mind that I'd sold a software company for enough money to buy myself a small island. Never mind that my investment portfolio dwarfed what most people in that room would accumulate over their entire lives. In Isabel and Gerald's world, if you weren't grinding through some corporate machine with a title and a corner office, you weren't really working. Tech stuff, Gerald repeated, the way you'd repeat I collect dryer lint, a combination of pity and mild disgust. Well, that's nice. Trevor clapped again. I was beginning to think it was involuntary. The food arrived, obscenely expensive cuts of meat arranged on plates like modern art, the kind of pretentious cuisine where you need a magnifying glass to locate your actual meal. Isabel kept holding court, treating everyone to her greatest professional hits while I worked on my steak and wondered if this was what purgatory felt like. Expensive, uncomfortable, and full of people who use disruption as a personality trait. Then came dessert, and with it the moment that blew everything up. Isabel stood up, champagne glass raised, face flushed from wine and self-admiration. I want to make a toast, she announced, and the entire table immediately snapped to attention like she was about to read from a sacred text. To strong women who lift men up by showing them exactly how it's done. The table lost it. Gerald nearly choked on his scotch. Monica applauded right along with Trevor, producing a symphony of pure enabling behavior. Then Isabel turned to me, eyes gleaming with that particular flavor of cruelty people like to dress up as playfulness. So, Miles, go ahead and tell everyone, what's it actually feel like, watching me succeed while you sit home doing nothing all day? The whole table leaned forward, waiting to watch me squirm. A few faces showed some discomfort, but most were barely keeping a straight face. This was entertainment. The Successful Wife and Her Deadweight Husband, a comedy for our times. Let me back up and paint you the full picture of my life before that dinner where I metaphorically set fire to my wife's entire sense of reality. Around Kinton Holdings, I was essentially invisible. Not in the cool, superhero way. More like the why did someone bring him? Way that makes you question every decision that led you here. People knew me as Isabel's +1, the husband who showed up to company functions in nice clothes, smiled politely, and nodded along while people talked about quarterly numbers and market share like it was the most riveting conversation since the invention of language. Oh, you're Isabel's husband, they'd say, as if that was the whole of me. As if I had no existence before she appeared, as if I'd been assembled specifically to hang off her arm at networking events. But here's the thing about doing nothing, it turns out it's actually very hard work when you're secretly running the entire show from behind a curtain, like some kind of financial Wizard of Oz. But I'm getting ahead of myself. See, while everyone at Kinton Holdings was busy treating me like some kind of stay-at-home trophy husband who spent his days gaming in his underwear and living off his wife's success, I was actually the majority shareholder of the whole company. Yeah. 77%. I own more of Kinton Holdings than Gerald Kinton himself, which was particularly funny given his name was literally on the building. How did that happen? Grab something to snack on, because this story runs circles around anything on Netflix right now. It started when Gerald made some genuinely catastrophic investment decisions that would make a compulsive gambler look financially responsible. The man had been throwing company money at every trendy startup that showed up with a pitch deck, convinced he was going to become the next great venture capitalist. Blockchain dog walking apps. Subscription boxes for artisanal air. I wish I was making that up. He literally put money into a company selling premium air from exotic locations in fancy little bottles, like Goop, but somehow even more unhinged. Naturally, every single one of these visionary investments tanked harder than the Titanic hitting a second iceberg. Suddenly Kinton Holdings was hemorrhaging cash at a rate that gives accountants actual nightmares. The company was circling the drain and making gurgling noises about it. Banks were calling. Creditors were sharpening their knives. Gerald was sweating through his tailored suits and probably nursing an ulcer the size of a small state. This was back in 2017, when I still held out some hope that my marriage to Isabel might actually be built on mutual respect rather than her treating me like a pet rock she kept around for tax purposes. I'd recently cashed out of a software company I'd built from the ground up, a lean cybersecurity firm that had caught the eye of some serious players in Silicon Valley. Nothing flashy, just real technology solving real problems instead of vaporware designed to separate investors from their money. The exit had left me comfortable enough to retire and maybe acquire a decent yacht, a substantial house, or enough therapy to process my in-laws for the rest of my natural life. But I wasn't the retiring type. And definitely not the yacht type. I was more the let's see where this goes type, which is probably the reason I ended up here in the first place. Gerald came to me one night, sweating and desperate, like a man who just realized the house was burning and his pants were still inside. He pulled me aside at some family dinner, probably one where Isabel had spent 3 hours walking everyone through her latest career victory, and asked if we could speak privately. We ended up in his home office, which was styled like a movie set designed by someone whose entire vision of wealth came from 1980s thrillers: dark wood, leather chairs, those crystal decanters that nobody actually pours from but everyone owns. "Miles," he said, pouring himself a serious measure of scotch that probably cost more than my first car. "I need your help." Now, Gerald had never needed anything from me before. He'd made it abundantly clear over the years that he viewed me roughly the way you view a piece of furniture, technically there, occasionally functional, but not really worth a meaningful conversation. So hearing him admit he needed me was like watching a cat ask a mouse for directions. "What kind of help?" I asked, genuinely intrigued by what could make a man like Gerald Kinton humble himself enough to come to his underachieving son-in-law. That's when it all came out. The bad bets, the mounting debt, the creditors circling like sharks who'd caught a whiff of blood. Kinton Holdings was in serious trouble, the kind that ends with bankruptcy hearings and your name becoming shorthand for poor judgment. He needed a silent investor, someone who could inject enough capital to stabilize things while he figured out how to stop the bleeding. "I can't let this go public," he said, his voice cracking a little. "If the board finds out how bad it really is, they'll push me out. If our clients catch wind of it, they'll run. I need someone I trust. Family, who can help without making waves." Family. That was rich. This was a man who'd spent years treating me like a stray dog Isabel had dragged home. But I'm not petty. Okay, I'm extremely petty. But I'm also a businessman. And I could smell an opportunity when it walked up and slapped me with a balance sheet. "What are you offering?" I asked. He offered shares. A lot of them. Controlling interest, actually, in exchange for enough cash to clear the immediate debts and keep the lights on while he restructured. He was desperate enough to hand over the keys to the kingdom to save it, probably assuming I'd be a passive investor who'd collect dividend checks and stay out of the way. I accepted. Obviously. But here's where it gets good. I didn't just become a shareholder. I became the shareholder, with majority control of the entire operation. And I did it through a chain of holding companies and shell corporations that made an offshore tax haven look like a simple Excel spreadsheet. That's where Priya came in. Priya Sharma was my accountant, and calling her just an accountant was like calling Michelangelo some guy who liked ceilings. This woman could make money move and reappear in entirely different places like she was doing card tricks with spreadsheets. She had more credentials than most people have names, and she approached tax law the way a chess grandmaster approaches a tournament, relentlessly, strategically, without mercy. "You want to own this company without anyone knowing you own it?" she asked when I laid it all out. That's basically my favorite thing in the world. She built a web of holding entities so layered and complex it made Russian nesting dolls look like a beginner's puzzle. LLCs stacked inside other LLCs, trusts holding shares through intermediary vehicles, the full package. On paper, the ownership structure of Kinton Holdings looked like a bunch of boring corporate names that meant nothing to anyone. My name appeared nowhere near the top. But I was there. Oh, I was absolutely there. 77% ownership, voting rights and everything. I could fire anyone, greenlight any major decision, veto anything I didn't like. I was running the show, except instead of strings, I had bylaws and shareholder agreements. And I pulled all of this off while Isabel thought I was grinding through freelance coding gigs. Every time she asked what I was working on, I'd mumble something about debugging or algorithm optimization, and her eyes would go blank within about 4 seconds, like I'd started speaking ancient Sumerian. She had zero interest in what I actually did, which made the whole secret owner thing embarrassingly easy to maintain. The best part? Gerald knew I held the majority stake, but we'd structured the deal so he could still run day-to-day operations as long as the company stayed healthy. Staying out of the spotlight worked for everyone. No board meetings, no strategy sessions. Just a protected investment and a very, very patient game. All right, let's rewind back to 2017. A great year. People were still pretending fidget spinners were an investment vehicle and everyone thought crypto was about to replace cash. It was also the year Gerald Kinton's financial empire came within inches of collapsing like a house of cards in a wind tunnel, and I quietly became the secret owner of his entire operation without a single person noticing. Picture this, Tuesday afternoon in March. I'm sitting in my home office, which was really just the spare bedroom Isabel had grudgingly let me convert into a workspace, on the condition I kept it presentable in case company came over. My phone rings. Unknown number. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, because the only calls from unknown numbers are either scam robots telling me my car's extended warranty is dying or other robots with strong opinions about my student loans. But something made me pick this one up. Miles Brooks, I said, leaning back in my chair. Miles, it's Gerald. His voice sounded like he'd been gargling gravel soaked in anxiety. We need to meet in person today if you can manage it. Now, Gerald didn't do spontaneous. This man had his schedule locked down 3 days in advance and probably ran his morning coffee on a flow chart. Hearing him sound frantic and disorganized was like watching a penguin suddenly take flight, theoretically possible, but genuinely unsettling. Sure, I said, glancing at my calendar, which was, let's be real, completely empty. Come to my office. 6 o'clock. And Miles, he paused. Don't mention this to Isabel. Oh. Now that was interesting. Gerald never kept anything from his daughter. She was his golden child, his protégé, the one who could do no wrong even when she did everything wrong. If he was cutting her out, something had truly broken. I showed up at Kinton Holdings headquarters at exactly 6, wearing jeans and a button-down, because I'd long since figured out that dressing too formally made people nervous while dressing too casually made them dismissive. The building was one of those modern glass stacks that looked like someone had piled transparent boxes on top of each other and called it innovation. Very look how forward-thinking we are while being completely generic. The receptionist, a young guy named Marcus who permanently looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, barely glanced up as I walked through. Mr. Kinton's expecting you. Top floor. The elevator ride gave me time to wonder what fresh disaster I was walking into. Maybe Gerald wanted to float another one of his brilliant investment ideas. Maybe he was finally going to treat me like a person instead of his daughter's questionable life decision. Maybe aliens had made contact and he needed a tech guy to translate. Probably not that last one. Gerald's office was larger than my first apartment and furnished like a museum exhibit on the history of conspicuous wealth. The mahogany desk alone probably cost more than a luxury car, and the view stretched over the whole city like he was some corporate deity surveying his domain. Except his domain was currently on fire, financially speaking. He wasn't alone. Sitting across from his desk was a woman I'd never seen before. Mid-50s, steel gray hair and a sharp bob, a pantsuit that communicated I will dismantle you in court and enjoy every second of it. She had a leather briefcase open across her lap and the expression of someone who'd heard every excuse ever invented and wasn't impressed by any of them. Miles, this is Patricia Thornton, Gerald said, gesturing to her like he was introducing me to something genuinely ominous. She's our corporate attorney and she's going to walk you through the situation. Patricia looked me over with the kind of assessment normally reserved for livestock at auction. Mr. Brooks, Gerald tells me you recently sold a software company for a significant sum. Define significant, I said, dropping into one of the unnecessarily grand chairs. 7 figures, possibly 8. Her tone made it clear she already had the exact number memorized to the penny. Let's say I came out ahead, I replied, not interested in giving away information for nothing. She opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder thick enough to cause actual harm if thrown with enough force. Kinton Holdings is in financial distress. Severe distress. Mr. Kinton pursued several high-risk investments over the past 18 months that not only failed to generate returns but produced significant losses. How significant are we talking? I asked, though the shape of things was already coming into focus. 23 million, Gerald said it the way you'd confess something at a confessional. Give or take. I fought the urge to choke on my own surprise. 23 million. That wasn't a bad investment. That was a catastrophic collapse of judgment, the kind that usually comes with legal consequences. Good Lord, Gerald, I said. What exactly did you invest in? ICE futures for penguins? Various ventures, Patricia cut in smoothly. Blockchain applications, emerging market funds, several tech startups promising to revolutionize everything. The way she said revolutionize everything was exactly how most people say horse manure. Let me guess, I said. They didn't actually revolutionize anything except your cash reserves. Gerald had the basic decency to look embarrassed. His face was cycling through a reddish-purple progression that his cardiologist would definitely not have approved of. I thought I was diversifying. Positioning the company for future growth. Every analyst said tech was where you needed to be. Every analyst also said Pets.com was going to reshape commerce, I pointed out. We both know how that ended. Patricia seemed to appreciate that I wasn't sugarcoating anything. A brief flicker of a smile crossed her face before she snapped back to professional-level terrifying. The point, Mr. Brooks, is that the company is now carrying substantial debt. We've managed to keep it quiet so far, but creditors are escalating. If word gets out, clients will panic, staff will bolt, and the whole operation implodes. And you're looking for me to do what exactly? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. Save it, Gerald said flatly. I need someone I trust to inject capital and absorb the debt. Someone who won't go running to the board or the press and turn this into a circus. Someone like family, Patricia added. Her tone suggested she found the entire plan somewhere between questionable and genuinely reckless. I leaned back and acted like I was thinking it over, while my brain was already doing backflips and mapping out scenarios. This was an opportunity delivered to my doorstep with a bow on it. Gerald was desperate enough to offer me whatever I wanted, which meant I could negotiate from a position of strength for what might be the first time in our entire relationship. What's in it for me? I asked. Shares, Gerald said quickly. Substantial equity in the company. We can hammer out the specifics, but we're talking a meaningful ownership stake. How meaningful? He exchanged a glance with Patricia, who looked like she had objections but knew better than to voice them right now. Controlling interest. Majority stake. Enough to make this genuinely worth your time. I let that sit in the air for a moment, watching Gerald squirm in his $1,000 chair. This man, who'd spent years treating me like I was barely qualified to carry his daughter's purse, was now offering me control of his life's work. The irony was thick enough to slice and serve. I want 77%, I said. Patricia actually let out an audible gasp. Gerald turned a purple that was probably medically inadvisable. 77? Miles, that's not just controlling interest. That's total ownership. You're right, I agreed, perfectly cheerful about it. It is. But here's the reality, Gerald, you need me significantly more than I need you. I could walk out that door right now and go buy a house in Malibu. You, on the other hand, are about 3 months away from bankruptcy hearings and your name becoming synonymous with everything not to do in business. So yes, 77%. Take it or leave it. The silence that followed was exquisite. Patricia was looking at me with something approaching genuine respect. Gerald was running calculations that probably involved creative accounting and prayer. One more condition, I added. This stays completely quiet. My name doesn't appear anywhere near the public records. We structure this through holding companies, trusts, whatever it takes. As far as anyone's concerned, especially Isabel, I'm still just the guy who does freelance coding. Why? Gerald asked, genuinely baffled. I smiled. Let's just say I prefer operating off the radar. It's a lot more fun that way. Living with Isabel Kinton was like being permanently cast as the before photo in an infomercial where she was the miraculous product that fixed everything, except in this version, the product never stopped reminding you how broken you were and how fortunate you should feel that it even shared a room with you. Picture a typical Tuesday evening in the Brooks Kinton household. Yes, she used the hyphenated name, but only for herself. I was just Brooks, straight and simple, because apparently adding Kinton to my name would dilute her brand somehow. I'd be on our overpriced couch, the one she'd insisted we buy from some boutique furniture shop where the staff dressed entirely in black and made you feel personally responsible for climate change if you dared ask about the price, trying to read or watch something mindless on TV. Then Isabel would come home from work, and it was like someone had hit a switch labeled Activate Full Narcissism. Babe, you will not believe what happened today, she'd announce, dropping her designer bag on the counter with the kind of dramatic flair normally reserved for stage productions. She wouldn't wait for me to respond. That would require acknowledging I might have thoughts worth hearing. I landed the Henderson account. Do you understand how long people have been chasing Henderson? 2 years. 2 years. And I did it in 3 meetings. That's great, honey, I'd say, marking my page and resigning myself to another evening of the Isabel show. Great? Miles, it's career defining. It's legendary. Marcus from sales actually cried when he heard the news. Actual tears. Running down his actual face. She'd pour herself a glass of wine. Always white, always expensive, always sourced from some vineyard she'd discovered at a team building retreat that was really just a structured excuse to drink in Napa. Meanwhile, what did you get up to today? Let me guess, you worked on another coding project that will never actually launch. There it was. The little jab wrapped in a smile and a head tilt that was meant to look fond but landed more like a cobra measuring up a mouse. These little cuts were her specialty, tiny wounds dressed up as concern or teasing, designed to keep me aware of exactly where I stood in the household hierarchy. Something like that, I'd say, because explaining that I'd actually spent the day reviewing quarterly reports from the company she worked for, the company I secretly owned, would have broken the beautiful spell of the whole thing. You know what you should really think about? She'd continue, settling onto the couch beside me but somehow still managing to seem like she was standing on an elevated platform. You should talk to Daddy about getting something at Kinton Holdings. I'm sure we could find a spot for you. Maybe in IT, "You're decent with computers, right?" The fact that after 3 years of marriage she could still reduce my entire professional history to decent with computers was both genuinely insulting and deeply funny. It was like calling a neurosurgeon pretty handy with sharp objects. "I appreciate that," I'd say. "But I'm good doing my own thing." "Your own thing," she'd echo, with the tone someone uses when you've told them you're pursuing competitive thumb wrestling as a career. Miles, at some point you have to build something real. An actual career, not just freelance work scattered here and there. Don't you want to actually succeed at something? This was her favorite subject, my apparent lack of ambition. Never mind that I'd built and sold a software company currently running inside 3 Fortune 500 organizations. Never mind that my scattered freelance work had generated more wealth than most people see in multiple lifetimes. In Isabel's universe, success was measured in direct reports and the size of the font on your business card. "I am successful," I'd point out, knowing full well it was pointless. "I mean like me, babe." She'd give my leg a patronizing little pat that made me want to upend her wine glass onto the expensive couch just to watch the chaos unfold. "I'm not trying to be harsh. I just want you to reach your potential. Not everybody is built to be a high achiever, that's fine. But you could at least try to do something with your life." The irony was so rich I could taste it. Here was Isabel giving me a lecture on ambition and achievement while every dollar of her prized salary technically came from me. The company she worked for, I owned it. The bonuses she bragged about, funded by my capital. The corner office she loved, I could convert it into a ball pit if I felt like it. But I never said a word. I just smiled and nodded and let her believe she was the one keeping our household afloat. Dinner conversations were their own special category of painful. Isabel had this habit of turning every meal into a TED talk about her latest professional conquest. She'd narrate every meeting, every email, every micro decision like she was recording the director's commentary on her own biopic. "So then I told the client," she'd say, gesturing with her fork in ways that made me concerned for the walls, that if they wanted real market penetration, not the watered-down version their last vendor was giving them, they'd have to commit to our process. And guess what? They signed a 3-year contract on the spot. Market penetration, I'd repeat, working hard not to laugh at how seriously she took jargon that sounded like it came from corporate Mad Libs. "It's about reading the landscape, Miles. Positioning yourself as irreplaceable, crafting value propositions that actually land with stakeholder priorities." She'd look at me with the patience of a teacher waiting for the slow kid to grasp basic math. "Does that make sense to you?" Every word, I'd lie, sipping my water and wondering if purgatory felt like this. Her father wasn't much of an improvement. Gerald called at least twice a week, and every conversation somehow looped back around to Isabel's accomplishments and my apparent lack of any. "Miles, my boy," he'd boom through the phone speaker, because Isabel always put him on speaker whether I wanted that or not. "You should swing by the office sometime. See how an actual company runs. Might spark some ideas for your little projects." My little projects. Sure. The projects that were currently the only reason his company still had lights to keep on. The worst stretch was watching Isabel with her colleagues at company functions. I'd get dragged along to happy hours and networking events, hovering awkwardly near the bar while Isabel held court like she was a visiting dignitary. Her coworkers would orbit around her, laughing a beat too loud at her average jokes and nodding along with her most basic observations like she'd just figured out how gravity worked. "Isabel, that insight on client retention is genuinely brilliant," Monica from accounting would gush, eyes wide with manufactured wonder. "Oh, it's really just common sense," Isabel would reply with a false modesty that convinced absolutely no one. "You have to think strategically about managing relationships." Meanwhile I'd be off to the side, holding a beer and trying to reconstruct the series of decisions that had brought me to this exact moment. Sometimes people acknowledged my existence with strained small talk. "So Miles," Trevor from marketing once asked me, halfway through his third craft IPA, "what's it actually like being married to someone that driven?" "Like living with a hurricane," I answered honestly. "Loud, destructive, and you never quite know when or where it's going to hit." He laughed like I was being charming. I wasn't. But here's what that bizarre double life gave me: perspective. While Isabel was busy climbing her ladder and measuring her worth in quarterly bonuses and sales rankings, I was playing an entirely different game. She thought success meant titles and visibility and making sure the whole room knew your name. I understood that success was really about leverage, patience, and the deep satisfaction of letting people write you off completely, right up until the moment you prove them catastrophically wrong. Every dismissive remark, every condescending comment, every time she introduced me as my husband who does tech stuff, I filed it away. Not purely out of spite, though let's be honest, spite was definitely part of the equation, but more because I knew that eventually, in some perfect moment, All of it was going to come back around in the most spectacular way possible. The invitation to Isabel's top salesperson celebration dinner landed exactly the way you'd expect from someone whose ego needed its own area code, a group text that she'd somehow managed to make sound like an imperial proclamation. Dinner this Saturday at Redwood Steakhouse, it read, loaded with champagne emojis and celebration poppers. 7 p.m. sharp. Celebrating my latest achievement. Dress code, impressive. Can't wait to celebrate with my favorite people. I was lying on the couch when it came through, watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures that were somehow less unsettling than my wife's event planning. My phone buzzed. I read the message and felt my soul attempt to exit my body through my eye sockets. Saturday? I called out to Isabel, who was in the bedroom somewhere deep inside whatever ritual required 17 different skincare products and cost more than most people's car payments. Yes, Saturday, she yelled back, her voice muffled by what I assumed was some kind of angel tear facial mask. It's going to be incredible, Miles. Everyone who matters will be there. Everyone who matters. Isabel, speak for everyone who can witness my greatness and validate my existence. The guest list, which arrived in a follow-up text, read like a greatest hits compilation of people I'd strongly prefer to avoid. Her father Gerald. Monica from accounting, who laughed at every Isabel utterance like she was auditioning for a sitcom laugh track. Trevor from marketing, perpetual clapper. Bryce from sales, with his leased BMW and his need for everyone to know about it. Plus a handful of other coworkers whose names I could never hold on to because they all had the same personality, aggressively mediocre with delusions of grandeur. Do I have to go? I asked, already knowing the answer but feeling obligated to at least attempt escape. Isabel appeared from the bedroom, face covered in something green that made her look like she was auditioning for a swamp creature role. Of course you have to go. You're my husband. What would people think if you skipped it? Wouldn't want people thinking things, I said. Exactly. She completely missed my sarcasm, which was honestly our entire marriage summarized. And Miles, please try to actually engage tonight. Be supportive. Look interested in what people say, even if you're not. So basically, lie with my face. It's called being sociable, babe. You should try it sometime. The week leading up to dinner felt like watching someone plan their own coronation. Isabel spent hours agonizing over outfits, cycling through at least 15 dresses and soliciting my opinion on each one, then ignoring everything I said and picking something else entirely. She called the restaurant multiple times to confirm, adjust, and add people to the reservation. This is a really big deal, Miles, she said on Friday night, lying in bed scrolling her phone through what I assumed were articles on how to become even more insufferable. Top salesperson isn't just a title. It's a declaration. It says I'm the best. People respect that. People respect plenty of things, I replied, staring at the ceiling and contemplating what my life had become. Humility, for instance. That tends to go over pretty well. Humility is for people who don't have anything worth showcasing, she said, completely earnestly. When you've reached my level, people expect confidence. They want to see that you know your own value. I turned to look at her, this woman I'd married 3 years ago who had somehow transformed from someone I thought I loved into a walking LinkedIn profile. And what exactly is your value? More than most people, she answered without even a beat of hesitation. That's what tomorrow is about, Miles. Showing everyone that I've arrived. That I'm someone who counts. Saturday arrived with all the charm of an overdue dentist appointment. I spent the morning working out, not because I'm obsessive about fitness, but because hitting a heavy bag provides a kind of catharsis when you can't actually hit people. Then I showered, shaved, and pulled out the Tom Ford suit Isabel had insisted I buy for occasions of significance. $1,200 for glorified fabric. Highway robbery with better tailoring. Getting ready felt like suiting up for battle. I fixed my tie, stared at my reflection, and wondered when exactly my life had become an elaborate performance. Isabel emerged from her 2-hour preparation process looking like she was heading to a red carpet premiere. Hair immaculate, makeup flawless, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly expenses. How do I look? She asked, doing a slow spin. Like someone who plans to make tonight entirely about herself, I said, honestly. She beamed like I just handed her the world's greatest compliment. Perfect. That's exactly the vibe I'm going for. The drive to Redwood Steakhouse was a masterclass in patience. Isabel spent all 20 minutes of it briefing me like I was a junior staffer about to meet a head of state. Be supportive, Miles. Smile while people are speaking. Don't look bored. And please don't start talking about coding or whatever it is you do all day, nobody there wants to hear about that. So what should I talk about? I asked, navigating through traffic while she checked her makeup in the visor mirror for the 17th time. Just let me lead the conversation. You can nod and agree. That's what supportive husband looks like. So I'm a prop. You're my partner, she corrected, though it landed exactly like she meant prop. Tonight is my night, Miles. Everything tonight is about celebrating what I've accomplished, and I need you to be on board with that. I was entirely on board, actually. More than she knew. In fact, I was counting on everyone's full attention being locked onto Isabel, because what I had planned was going to hit so much harder in front of her entire fan club. We pulled into the restaurant parking lot. A few familiar cars were already there: Gerald's Mercedes, Monica's Lexus, Trevor's Prius, which he'd convinced himself was making a meaningful contribution to the environment. Remember, Isabel said as we climbed out, smoothing her dress down one more time. Supportive. Engaged. The husband I need you to be tonight. Don't worry, I said, offering her my arm as we walked toward the entrance. I'm going to be exactly the husband you deserve. She smiled, completely missing the gap between what she needed and what she deserved. The table at Redwood Steakhouse looked like it had been designed by someone who considered more is more to be a sacred design principle. Wine glasses multiplied across each place setting at a rate that suggested either professional sommelier or functional alcoholics. Candles flickered dramatically. Floral centerpieces that cost more than my first car sat in the middle of everything. Gerald occupied the head of the table, naturally, because in his mind, every table was his table, every room was his stage, every conversation was a platform. Never mind that said stage had been hours from foreclosure before I quietly saved it. Monica had positioned herself directly beside Isabel, ready to perform laughter on cue like a trained seal. Trevor was 3 drinks ahead of the rest of us. Bryce was loudly narrating the specs on his BMW to anyone who failed to make eye contact fast enough. And there I was. $1,200 suit, glass of champagne that tasted like fermented regret, watching this entire circus with the calm of a man who knew exactly how the night was going to end. Dinner started off exactly as predicted. Appetizers arrived, tiny architectural arrangements of food on plates the size of frisbees, the kind of pretentious cuisine where you genuinely need to search for what you're supposed to eat. This is absolutely divine, Monica declared, holding up something that might have been bread or possibly a section of drywall. Isabel, your taste in restaurants is honestly a gift. I know, Isabel replied, not even attempting to fake humility. I always know the right places. It's just something I have. Gerald launched into a story about the first time he'd eaten at Redwood Steakhouse, framed naturally around some deal he'd closed and the cigars that cost more than most people's grocery bills. The whole table listened with their best impression of genuine interest. I focused on my food and quietly ran a mental countdown. The thing about patience is that it's simultaneously a virtue and its own particular kind of suffering. I'd been patient for years. Patient through the belittling. Patient through Gerald treating me like sentient furniture. Patient through an entire company assuming I was some kind of unemployed hanger-on riding his wife's coattails. Tonight, that patience was finally going to pay out some dividends. Literally. The main course arrived with the ceremony of a royal birth. Waiters materialized like synchronized swimmers, placing enormous stakes before each of us with the gravity of priests distributing communion. Mine was perfect, medium rare, seasoned exactly right, from what was clearly a very pampered cow. I would never say this out loud, but it was genuinely excellent. Now this, Gerald announced, carving into his steak with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything, this is what success tastes like. Speaking of success, Isabel said, visibly coiling up for an extended monologue about herself. I wanted to thank everyone for showing up tonight. This award genuinely means everything to me. Top salesperson isn't just a label, it's validation. It's proof that hard work and raw talent actually pay off. Trevor started clapping. Monica joined in. Within seconds the entire table was applauding like Isabel had announced a cure for a major disease rather than hitting a sales quota. I couldn't have done this without my incredible team, she continued, sweeping her gaze around the table like a politician working a fundraiser. And of course my family. She looked at Gerald with actual warmth, then pivoted to me with something closer to obligation. And my husband Miles, who's been so supportive in his own way. In his own way. Translation, he lives in the same house and I occasionally remember he exists. Bryce, who'd been suspiciously quiet for the past 10 minutes, decided this was his moment. Isabel, honestly, you're an inspiration. The way you closed the Henderson account, that was masterclass level. Some of us have been in sales for years and never pulled off anything that clean. It's all about reading the room, Isabel explained, warming immediately to her favorite subject, herself. Understanding what someone needs before they've even named it. It's practically instinct for me now. The conversation devolved into what was essentially a corporate worship service, with Isabel as the deity and everyone else as devoted congregation. They analyzed her techniques, her instincts, her supernatural gift for closing, like she'd emerged from the womb preloaded with sales skills. I tuned most of it out, concentrating on my steak and the countdown I'd been running since we sat down. Dessert was coming. After dessert, the toast. And after the toast, that's where everything was going to change. Right on cue, dessert landed, some elaborate chocolate creation that probably violated several laws of physics with how rich it was. Isabel barely touched hers, too busy holding court and receiving tributes. Then came the champagne, real champagne this time. Bottles of Dom Perignon that the restaurant had probably marked up 300%. Gerald insisted on opening the first bottle himself, making a whole production of it like he was christening an ocean liner. Glasses were filled. Isabel stood up, face flushed and radiant with wine and self-satisfaction, looking like someone who'd just conquered a small nation and had prepared a speech about it. "I want to make a toast," she announced, and the table fell silent immediately. "To strong women who lift men up by showing them exactly how it's done." The table erupted. Gerald nearly snorted champagne through his nose. Monica was laughing hard enough to produce actual tears. Trevor clapped and laughed simultaneously, which is physically impressive and deeply irritating. Then Isabel turned to me, and I could see it in her eyes, that little flicker of gleeful cruelty that people get right before they publicly humiliate someone and convince themselves it's harmless fun. "So, Miles," she said, her voice carrying across not just our table but probably to the kitchen. "Tell us all, what's it actually feel like, watching me succeed while you sit home doing absolutely nothing?" The laughter doubled. Bryce was practically gasping. Monica looked like she was at risk of a medical event. Gerald shook his head with a grin that said, "Isn't my daughter wonderfully bold?" "Don't be upset, I'm just teasing," Isabel added, reaching over to touch my arm. As if a quick disclaimer erased the thing she'd just done. As if just kidding is some kind of magic undo button for public humiliation. The table leaned in. They were expecting me to laugh it off, maybe make some self-deprecating quip about being a kept man, play my assigned role in the narrative where Isabel was the star and I was just lucky to be in the same orbit. Instead, I smiled. Not a forced smile, not a polite one, a real one, the kind that should have been a warning to everyone watching that something was very, very wrong. "Teasing is fun," I said, completely calm, my voice steady while my chest was basically doing cartwheels. "Want to hear mine?" Isabel's smile slipped just a fraction, but she nodded, probably expecting some harmless joke about her shoe collection or her obsession with sales rankings. I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. Thick, heavy paper, the kind law firms use when they want you to understand that the contents are serious. I slid it across the table toward Isabel, watching her face shift from confused to uncertain as she picked it up. "What is this?" she asked, smile still holding but gone wobbly at the edges. "Open it," I said, taking a sip of champagne. Might as well enjoy the good stuff while reshaping someone's entire reality. She pulled out the documents inside, and I watched her face run through about 15 different emotional states in under 5 seconds. Confusion. Disbelief. Shock. Horror. And finally landing somewhere that looked like her soul was trying to evacuate through her eye sockets. "I own 77% of Kinton Holdings," I said, conversationally, the way you'd comment on the weather or mention that you like the bread. "Which means I own this company." "Your company. Your father's company. And effective immediately, Isabel Kinton, you're fired." You could have heard a pin drop in space. The silence was so complete, so total, that even the candles seemed to stop moving. Every face at the table had locked into some version of shock. Mouths hanging open. Eyes wide. Champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips. Monica looked like someone had just informed her that Santa wasn't real. Trevor had finally, mercifully, stopped clapping. Bryce's signature smirk had melted clean off his face like wax on a hot plate. And Gerald? Gerald looked like he was watching his entire world come apart in slow motion. But Isabel's face, that was the masterpiece. That was 3 years of condescension, 3 years of being made to feel like nothing, 3 years of having my existence treated like a punchline, all of it crashing down in one perfect wave of realization. She started, but nothing followed. I stood up, straightened my $1,200 suit, and smiled at the table. "Thanks for dinner, everyone. The steak was genuinely exceptional. 5 stars. Highly recommend." The thing about detonating a bomb in the middle of a fine dining establishment is that the shockwave takes a second to arrive. For about 3 full seconds after I announced my ownership and Isabel's termination, nobody moved. It was like someone had hit pause on reality, everyone frozen in this stunning tableau of collective disbelief. Then reality unpaused and everything fell apart at once. Isabel's jaw dropped so far I was genuinely concerned about her jaw alignment. Her face cycled through colors like a malfunctioning traffic signal. Red, white, purple, back to red. The documents were still trembling in her hands, and she was staring at them like they were written in ancient script rather than plain legal English. She stammered, and I'd never heard her stammer before. Isabel was always sharp, always loaded with a comeback or a cutting observation. Watching her struggle to form a sentence was like watching a veteran actor blank on opening night. You can't. This isn't. What the hell is this? Gerald snatched the papers out of her hands with enough force to nearly tear them. His face had shifted from its normal ruddy tone to something approaching eggplant, which probably wasn't doing him any cardiovascular favors. He flipped through page after page of legal documentation, the kind Patricia Thornton had prepared with the thoroughness that justified her hourly rate, as if reading faster would somehow change what was written. This is impossible, he muttered, cycling through the pages again. Miles, you can't just, we had an agreement. We did have an agreement, I confirmed, still standing, because sitting down would have ruined the exit energy. An agreement where I purchased 77% of your company in exchange for pulling it back from the edge of bankruptcy. Remember that Tuesday in 2017 in your office? You were sweating through a suit worth more than most people make in a month. Monica had both hands over her mouth, as if physically holding in a scream. Trevor had stopped clapping, probably a personal record, and was staring at me like I'd just revealed I was an extraterrestrial observing human behavior. Bryce kept switching his gaze between his phone and the documents in Gerald's hands, visibly calculating whether this affected his BMW lease. But you said, Isabel's voice cracked, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely fragile rather than strategically emotional. You told me you were doing freelance coding. You said you were working on small projects. I was working on a project, I replied, savoring every syllable more than I'd savored anything in recent memory. A pretty significant one, actually. It was called secretly owning the company my wife works for while she spends 3 years treating me like an unemployed loser. Very fulfilling work. Deeply satisfying on a personal level. Miles, you cannot fire my daughter. Gerald shot to his feet so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor with a bang loud enough to turn every head in the restaurant. We were officially the table now, the live dinner theater everyone else was watching over their overpriced steaks. This is absurd. This is. Patricia signed off on all of this, I said. Patricia did more than sign off, she structured the whole thing. Remarkable woman. You should give her a raise. Oh, I suppose that's actually my call now, isn't it? A waiter approached with the nervous energy of someone trying to decide between calling security and letting this play out organically. Is everything all right over here? Everything is completely fine, I assured him. Just a small family conversation about corporate ownership and employment restructuring. Nothing to worry about. Though I will need a box for the rest of my steak. And definitely the creme brulee, not leaving that behind. He nodded and retreated at a pace that suggested survival instinct was kicking in. Smart man. You absolute bastard, Isabel hissed, and the tears coming now were real ones, not the on-demand kind she could summon for effect, but actual, raw tears. You've been lying to me for years. What kind of person does that? The kind whose wife turns every dinner into a performance about her own greatness while asking what it feels like watching her succeed while he does nothing, I replied. That kind. The kind who gets introduced at every company event as my husband who does tech stuff, like he's some embarrassing hobby you can't quite figure out how to get rid of. Monica finally found her voice. This is insane. Miles, nobody is going to believe you've been running this company all along. I haven't been running it, I clarified. Gerald's been running it, doing a mediocre job, by the way. I've just been owning it. There's a real difference. Though now that I'm thinking about it, some operational changes might be overdue. Starting with a full restructuring of the sales department. Trevor made a noise like a small distressed animal. Bryce had gone the color of uncooked dough, probably realizing his BMW bragging rights might have an expiration date if I decided to clean house. Daddy, do something, Isabel pleaded, turning to Gerald with desperation written across her face. But Gerald wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at me with an expression that combined fury, humiliation, and something that was grudgingly close to respect. You planned all of this, he said slowly. The whole thing. You've been planning this for years. Planning is a strong word, I said. I prefer patiently waiting for exactly the right moment, and by the way, thank you, Isabel, for delivering it so perfectly tonight. That little toast about watching you succeed while I do nothing? Chef's kiss. Couldn't have written it better if I'd tried. I'll sue you, Isabel threatened, though her voice had lost its conviction. I'll take you for everything. Divorce, litigation, I will destroy you. With what resources? I asked, reasonably. You just got terminated. And our prenup, the one you insisted on, by the way, because you were so concerned I'd try to claim your family's wealth, does a very thorough job of protecting my assets. Patricia reviewed it. Airtight. Great work, truly. The color drained from Isabel's face as the memory of that prenup settled in, the one she'd presented with such smugness before the wedding, protecting her family fortune from her underachieving husband. The irony was so stunning it deserved to be framed and hung on a wall. This is corporate aggression, Gerald blustered, though he deflated considerably. I'll call an emergency board meeting. We'll challenge this. You can't just walk in and. The board answers to the majority shareholder, I interrupted. That's me. I basically am the board at this point. Or at minimum, I control enough votes that your emergency meeting would be very short and very disappointing. I picked up my champagne glass, drained it, and set it down with a satisfying ring against the table. Now, if everyone will excuse me, I have a lovely evening ahead. The city's beautiful this time of night. Maybe I'll walk a bit, enjoy the fresh air and my newly activated corporate authority, think about which other employees have spent the last few years being insufferable. Miles, wait. Isabel stood up and reached for my arm. For just a second, one brief second, I almost felt something. Almost. Then I remembered every cutting remark, every dismissive introduction, every time she'd made herself bigger by making me smaller. Don't touch me, I said quietly, stepping back. You wanted to know what it feels like watching someone succeed. Now you get to find out what it feels like watching your world unravel. Sit with that. I hear it builds character. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a table of people whose entire map of reality had just been redrawn. The waiter appeared near the door with a bag containing my leftover steak and creme brulee. Bless him entirely. I took it, pressed $100 bill into his hand, because none of this was his fault and he'd just witnessed the most uncomfortably eventful shift of his serving career, and walked out into the night. The cool air hit me like grace. Behind me, through the restaurant windows, I could see our table in full meltdown. Isabel crying, Gerald yelling, Monica looking like she might actually faint, Trevor probably reconsidering whether clapping would help. My phone started buzzing before I reached the car. Isabel calling, declined. Gerald calling, declined. Unknown number, declined. By the time I got home, there were 20 missed calls and a voicemail from Isabel that was split evenly between sobbing and fury. I listened to it while eating my leftover steak, which somehow tasted even better cold with the sound of consequences finally catching up to 3 years of being treated like garbage. You're a monster, her voice came through the phone, thick and broken. How could you do this to me? To us? Everything I built, everything I worked for. I deleted it before she finished. Everything she'd built had been constructed on a foundation I'd paid for with money she didn't know I had, while she spent every day reminding me how little I'd accomplished. The creme brulee was outstanding, by the way. 5 stars. Would absolutely recommend. Waking up the morning after you've publicly humiliated your wife and strategically demolished her entire professional identity probably should have felt worse than it did. Maybe I was supposed to be lying awake in a spiral of guilt and regret. Instead, I woke up feeling like I'd just slept for 12 straight hours in the best hotel bed of my life, which probably says something unflattering about my character. But I was at peace with that. The first signal that my life had fundamentally shifted came when I opened my front door to get the newspaper. Yes, I still get an actual physical newspaper, because apparently I am emotionally 80 years old, and found a man with a camera standing on my lawn like that was a perfectly reasonable place to be at 7 in the morning. Mr. Brooks, he called out, raising his camera like he was documenting a celebrity sighting rather than photographing a guy in pajama pants and a college t-shirt that had survived better eras. Can you comment on your hostile takeover of Kinton Holdings? Hostile takeover? I called back, squinting into the morning sun. It wasn't hostile at all. I smiled throughout the entire thing. That's actually the opposite of hostile. He kept shooting. Through the window I could see there were now 3 photographers, plus a woman with a microphone who'd materialized from somewhere. They were camped out like paparazzi outside a celebrity scandal, which, technically, this was. My phone had detonated overnight. Text messages from numbers I'd never seen. Emails from business journalists. LinkedIn requests from people who presumably wanted to write pieces about the silent shareholder, which was, apparently, what the business media had started calling me. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and looked up what the internet had decided about my life. The first article I found was on a tech business blog. The headline, Silent Shareholder Reveals Majority Stake in Stunning Dinner Revelation. Stunning Dinner Revelation. Written like I'd announced the coming of a messiah rather than just firing my wife in front of her father and coworkers. The article itself was entertaining, though. Some journalist had gotten the story from someone at the dinner, probably within minutes of me walking out, and had written this breathless piece about corporate intrigue and hidden ownership structures. I made the mistake of scrolling the comments section, as one does. This is the most unhinged thing I've ever read. Imagine getting roasted by your own wife and then casually firing her in front of everyone. This person is a legend. Someone call Netflix. This is a series. By mid-morning the articles had multiplied. Who is Miles Brooks? The man behind Kinton Holdings. From silent partner to majority shareholder, an unlikely story. The best part was watching Isabel try to control the narrative. She'd posted on LinkedIn, of course she had, something that was equal parts damage control and creative revisionism. Recent developments in my family life have led to some unexpected shifts in my professional path, she'd written. While I'm no longer with Kinton Holdings, I'm excited to explore what comes next. Sometimes change, even when it's hard, opens doors we didn't know were there. 300 comments, mostly variations of what happened? And are you okay? With a handful of sharper ones like karma really does move in mysterious ways. She was framing getting fired by her secretly wealthy husband as some kind of empowering career pivot, which was honestly impressive in its audacity. My phone rang. Patricia Thornton. You've made quite a spectacle, she said, the amusement audible underneath the professional tone. There are reporters outside my office asking about the acquisition structure. My assistant has had to learn 17 variations of no comment in a single morning. My apologies for that, I said, not particularly sorry at all. Probably should have warned you about the timing. The timing was actually perfect. Brutal, but perfect. She paused. I assume you're already thinking about restructuring. How did you know? Because you're not the kind of person who fires his wife in a restaurant just for the drama of it. You have a plan. What is it? I liked Patricia. Sharp, efficient, no time wasted pretending business was anything other than chess with better clothes. I want a clean operation, I told her. Starting with a new CEO, someone who actually knows how to run a company instead of playing golf and betting on artisanal air startups. Do you have someone specific in mind? Tara Lane. A pause. Tara Lane from Meridian Solutions? The one who restructured an entire department before her first lunch break? That's exactly the one. Relentless, efficient, and genuinely allergic to incompetence. Exactly what this company needs. She'll cost you, Patricia warned. Her terms are going to be significant. I own 77% of a multi-million-dollar company, I said. I think I can cover significant. By noon, the photographers outside had grown to 6, plus 2 news vans. I ordered Thai food delivery just to watch them get excited when the car pulled up, then visibly deflate when it turned out to be pad Thai. The restructuring moved fast. Tara Lane agreed to a video call that afternoon. She appeared on my screen looking exactly like her reputation suggested, sharp blazer, sharper expression, hair pulled back in a way that communicated pure business. Mr. Brooks, she said, with zero preamble. I've been reading about you all morning. Interesting story. Yeah, it's been a strange 24 hours, I admitted. I don't do strange, she said flatly. I do outcomes. Your company is a disaster. Bloated departments, redundant roles, a culture that hasn't evolved since the late 80s. If I take this job, I'm tearing out everything that doesn't work and starting over. Are you ready for that? That's precisely what I'm asking for. She smiled for the first time. It was a little bit terrifying. Then we have a deal. Send the contracts. I'll be there Monday. Gerald tried to call an emergency board meeting, exactly as I'd predicted. It lasted about 15 minutes before the board, most of whom were smart enough to understand which way things were moving, voted in favor of every change I proposed. New CEO, full departmental restructuring, compensation structures that rewarded actual performance instead of golf handicaps and tenure. Within a week, Kinton Holdings looked nothing like it had before. Tara Lane had arrived like a weather event and immediately started correcting things that should have been fixed years ago. The old hierarchy that had rewarded yes men and quietly strangled anyone with an original idea was being broken down piece by piece. And Isabel? She spent the week posting inspirational quotes on social media about resilience and fresh starts. Finding myself, she captioned one photo at a coffee shop, laptop open, like she was deep in meaningful work rather than scrolling job boards and crying into her latte. I sent her exactly one text. The first communication since the dinner. Google Maps might actually help with the finding yourself part. Apparently they're very good at locating lost things. She didn't reply. But I like to think she found it useful. A week after the media circus began its slow fade into the background, replaced by some celebrity drama and a viral video of a cat doing something irresistible, I was finally starting to enjoy the quiet of my new normal. It was a Tuesday evening. I was on my couch in sweatpants eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container like a functioning adult, when someone started hammering on my front door. Not knocking, hammering. The kind of relentless pounding that meant either a genuine emergency or someone who had forgotten doorbells existed. The hammering continued, and curiosity outlasted my desire to finish my Kung Pao chicken in peace. I opened the door, and there stood Isabel. Except this wasn't the polished, camera-ready Isabel who'd spent 3 years of our marriage looking like she'd walked out of a business lifestyle magazine. This was Isabel at her most unguarded. Mascara streaked down both cheeks. Hair shoved into a forgotten ponytail. Wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that I was fairly certain used to be mine. "Miles," she said, and her voice fractured immediately. Not the strategic crack she deployed when she wanted something, but a genuine break, the kind that comes from crying for roughly 17 hours straight. "Isabel," I replied, still holding my Chinese food. "You look terrible. Can I come in?" She dragged her sleeve across her face, making the mascara situation considerably worse. Every rational instinct I had said close the door, go back to the Kung Pao chicken, and watch the submarine documentary you paused. But there was something different about her, something that made her seem less like the woman who'd spent years diminishing me and more like an actual human being moving through something genuinely painful. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. "But if you touch my Chinese food, we're done talking." She walked in slowly, taking in the apartment like she was seeing it properly for the first time. "I made a mistake," she said, standing in the middle of my living room like she wasn't sure she had permission to sit. "Which one?" I asked, settling back onto the couch with my food. "There have been several recently." "Be specific." "Mocking you at the dinner. In front of everyone." She crossed her arms around herself. "I didn't know, Miles. I genuinely had no idea you own the company. If I had known." "You would have what?" I set the food down, suddenly not hungry. "Been nicer? Shown me some respect?" "That's the problem, Isabel. You would only have treated me differently if you'd known I had power. That's not respect. That's just self-preservation." She flinched like I'd physically struck her, and the tears came again. Real ones. "You're right," she whispered. "You're completely right. I was cruel to you. For years, I made you feel like you were nothing. Less than nothing," I said. "You treated me like a burden you were stuck carrying while you went off and achieved greatness. Like I was dead weight you kept around out of some vague sense of obligation." "I know." She finally sat down, collapsing into the chair across from me like her legs had given out. "My father called you furniture once. At that 4th of July barbecue. Said you were like a nice ottoman, present but not particularly useful." And I laughed. I remembered. I'd been standing right there with a plate of potato salad, pretending I hadn't heard it, while Gerald and Isabel had their little bonding moment at my expense. "That's what pride does," I said, leaning back into the cushions. "It makes you loud and blind. Like karaoke at a funeral. You were so consumed with performing your own success, proving to every room how remarkable you were, that you never stopped to notice who you were stepping on to get there." "I'm sorry," she said. And for once in our entire shared history, it rang true. "I know that doesn't fix it. I know I destroyed what we had. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. What I turned into." We sat in silence for a moment. The submarine documentary was still murmuring in the background, something about torpedo engineering that felt wildly out of place for this particular conversation. "Are you asking for forgiveness?" I said finally. She looked up at me, mascara streaked and unguarded in a way I'd genuinely never seen. "I don't know if I've earned it." "You probably haven't," I agreed. "But that's not really the question. The question is whether I'm in a place to give it. Are you?" I smiled, not the triumphant one from the restaurant, not the satisfied one I'd worn all week. Just a tired one. "Maybe someday, Isabel. But right now I'm busy doing nothing." She laughed through her tears, soft and weak, but real. And for the first time in our entire relationship, it sounded like it actually came from somewhere genuine. 6 months later, I was standing in a ballroom that probably ran more per night than most people earned in a year, wearing a tuxedo that actually fit this time, no thanks to Isabel's fashion input, watching Kinton Holdings' transformation play out in real time, like some kind of corporate glow-up story. The charity gala was Tara Lane's idea. Community engagement, she'd called it, corporate shorthand for let's throw an expensive party, invite wealthy people, and talk them into donating money to good causes while they eat overpriced food. And honestly, it was working. The event had raised over $2 million for local education programs, and nobody had needed to be threatened to make it happen. The company itself had undergone a transformation that would make a butterfly look under-ambitious. Tara had gutted every toxic corner, replaced the old guard with people who actually knew their jobs, and installed a merit-based system that rewarded results instead of political maneuvering. Profits were up 23%. Employee morale had gone through the roof. Gerald still held his 23% and still showed up to board meetings to grumble about newfangled approaches like he was some kind of fossilized executive. But his objections carried about as much weight as a protest sign made of wet tissue paper. The board had seen the numbers, recognized that Tara's leadership was working, and essentially told Gerald to sit down and cash his dividend checks. Isabel had landed somewhere. She'd taken a position at a competing firm and was doing reasonably well by all accounts. Through the grapevine, and by grapevine I mean LinkedIn, which is entirely normal and not even slightly strange, word had gotten around that she'd become noticeably less insufferable. Apparently public humiliation and professional catastrophe had a way of teaching humility that nothing else quite managed. Character development through disaster. Beautiful thing. We'd signed divorce papers 3 months prior. It had been surprisingly civil, largely because the prenup she'd insisted on made the whole thing clean and uncomplicated. She kept her dignity, whatever remained of it. I kept essentially everything else. Patricia had described it as the smoothest divorce settlement I've ever processed, which felt like the kind of achievement worth noting. I was nursing a glass of scotch, the good kind, not the kind that tastes like a regret inferno, when a young woman approached. Couldn't have been older than 25, wearing a black dress and an intern badge that identified her as Jessica Chun, marketing. "Mr. Brooks," she said, carrying the nervous energy of someone who'd psyched themselves up for this conversation and was now fully committed to seeing it through. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just needed to say thank you." "Thank me?" I raised an eyebrow. "For what? I haven't actually done anything." She laughed like I'd made a joke. "That's not what everyone here says. Since the transition and since Miss Lane came in, the whole culture has shifted. People actually want to come to work. There are mentorship programs, real training, genuine development paths, and nobody's getting promoted just because they have the right golf buddy." "That's all Tara," I said, honestly. "She's the one doing the hard work. I just write checks and show up to events in uncomfortable shoes." "But everyone talks about how you turned the whole thing around," Jessica pressed, eyes bright with the kind of earnest admiration that corporate life hasn't quite beaten out of her yet. "About how you saw what needed to change and actually made it happen. What's your secret?" I took a slow sip of scotch and thought about it. Around us, the gala hummed along, people laughing, networking, performing their roles in this elaborate theater of wealth and generosity. A string quartet floated something classical from the corner. "You want the real secret?" I said, leaning in just slightly like I was about to reveal something cosmic. "Stay quiet long enough that everyone underestimates you." She looked confused, like she'd been hoping for some distilled wisdom about disruption and synergy. "Not literally nothing," I clarified. "But people mix up noise with productivity. They think if you're not constantly broadcasting your achievements and making sure everyone knows how buried you are in important work, then you must not be doing anything. Meanwhile, the people actually getting things done are working quietly, building their position, waiting for exactly the right moment." Jessica nodded slowly, turning it over. "So it's really about patience." "Patience, and letting people reveal who they actually are," I said. "When you're underestimated, people stop performing for you. The mask comes down. You see exactly who they are, who deserves your trust, and who deserves to be fired in front of their entire social circle at an overpriced steakhouse." She laughed again, probably assuming I was being metaphorical. I was not. She drifted off to network, leaving me alone with my scotch and the view through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights spread out like a constellation of possibilities. Somewhere out there, Isabel was at her own company event, performing her rebuilt role as the reformed professional who'd learned something hard about humility. Gerald was probably home, privately seething about how his son-in-law had outplayed him at every turn. Monica and Trevor were somewhere, still clapping and laughing on cue for whoever came next. And I was here. Not the invisible husband anymore. Not the underestimated +1. Not the guy who supposedly did nothing while his wife conquered the corporate world. I was the majority shareholder. The one who'd played the longest game and walked away with everything. When I stepped out of that gala into the cool night air, the city felt different. Lighter, somehow, like I'd finally stepped out from behind someone else's shadow and into my own. They'd laughed at me for doing nothing. Dismissed me. Treated me like furniture that needed feeding. Now they work for the guy who does it best. And honestly, that felt pretty damn good.